What kind of junk is this? We didn't expect anything else from your poor collective farm family. My mother-in-law threw my parents' gift on the floor in disgust. I merely shifted my gaze to the main guest of the anniversary, my husband's boss, who suddenly scowled and slowly stood up from the table. Before we continue, please write which country you are watching the video from. Enjoy listening. Claire always remembered the day when she first saw Margaret's house. It loomed like an impregnable fortress, a symbol of power and unattainable luxury. Back then, as a naive girl from a provincial town, she could never have imagined that one day she would become part of this life, even as a daughter-in-law. Daniel, Margaret's son, seemed to her like a prince from a fairy tale, handsome, educated, with the manners of a city dweller. Claire, a modest literature teacher, couldn't believe her luck when he proposed to her. She loved him with all her heart, not seeing the shadow that always darkened his gaze, the indecision that betrayed his dependence on his mother. The wedding was lavish, just like everything related to Margaret. Guests, expensive outfits, exquisite dishes, everything screamed wealth and status. Claire felt out of place, as if she were Cinderella at the ball. But Daniel was by her side, and his smile gave her confidence. However, the honeymoon ended quickly, and real life began. This was when Margaret's true nature came to light. From the first day, she made it clear to Claire that she was not her equal. In every gesture, in every word, there was disdain for her daughter-in-law's rural roots. "Daniel, why do you need this country bumpkin?" Margaret once let slip supposedly in jest, but Claire heard every word. This was the first blow, but far from the last. Margaret constantly found reasons to criticize. She disapproved of how Claire managed the household, her choice of clothing, and her love for literature, which she considered a waste of time. "You'd be better off doing something useful instead of reading books," she said contemptuously. Especially irksome to Margaret was Claire's origin. She frequently reminded her of her rural roots, as if it were an incurable vice. "What can you expect from a peasant? They have their own ideas of decency," she would say to her friends, not caring that Claire was present. Claire tried to ignore her mother-in-law's barbs. She loved Daniel and hoped that over time, Margaret would change her attitude towards her. But time passed, and nothing changed. On the contrary, her mother-in-law's disdain became increasingly apparent and poisoned Claire's life. Unfortunately, Daniel was in no hurry to defend his wife. He was too dependent on his mother, too afraid of her wrath. "Mom just says these things. Don't pay attention," he would justify, but it only hurt Claire more. She felt lonely and defenseless in this huge, foreign house. One day, Margaret hosted a dinner party. There were many guests, all important and influential people. Claire tried to stay in the background, but her mother-in-law seemed to deliberately put her on display. "Meet my daughter-in-law, Claire, from the deep countryside, so to speak. But it's all right, we'll re-educate her," Margaret said, and the guests erupted in forced laughter. Claire felt the blood rush to her face. She was ashamed and hurt. In the evenings, when Daniel went to work, Claire was left alone with her thoughts. She often remembered her own home, her parents, their modest but warm and heartfelt life. There she was loved and appreciated. There, she felt needed and important. Claire's parents, simple hard-working people, tried to support their daughter. Despite all the grievances, they understood how hard things were for her, but didn't want to interfere in her family life. They believed that Claire was strong and would cope with all the challenges. Every time they visited, Margaret greeted them with a strained smile and did everything to underscore their social inequality. She ostentatiously displayed expensive wines and exquisite snacks on the table, as if to show that they couldn't afford such things. Claire's parents tried not to pay attention to her antics. They were raised to respect their elders and didn't want to create conflict. They just wanted their daughter to be happy. One day, Claire's father, Thomas, decided to make a gift for Margaret. He was a skilled woodworker and made a photo frame by hand. It turned out to be very beautiful and elegant, with fine carvings and inlay. Claire was overjoyed by her father's gift. She knew Margaret loved expensive items and hoped that the box would please her. She imagined how her mother-in-law would praise her father's craftsmanship and how the ice in their relationship would melt. But, alas, her hopes were doomed to disappointment. Margaret didn't even glance at the frame. She merely grimaced and said, "What is this tasteless thing? I have plenty of expensive jewelry. I don't need these rural trinkets." Claire felt her heart clench. She was hurt for her father, who had put his soul into this box. She was ashamed of her mother-in-law, who didn't know how to appreciate simple human feelings. Daniel, as always, remained silent. He simply lowered his eyes and pretended nothing had happened. Claire realized she had no one to rely on. She was all alone against this cruel and arrogant woman. That evening, Claire couldn't sleep for a long time. She lay in bed and cried. It hurt and hurt her deeply. She felt humiliated and insulted. She did not understand why Margaret hated her so much. She recalled her mother-in-law's words about her rural roots and wondered if perhaps she really wasn't worthy of Daniel. Maybe she should leave and not torture either him or herself. But then she recalled Daniel's love, his tender embraces, his sweet words. She understood that she couldn't live without him. She loved him with all her heart and was willing to endure all humiliation for him. Claire decided to fight. She resolved to prove to Margaret that she was not worse than anyone else. She decided to become a worthy wife for Daniel and earn her mother-in-law's respect. She did not know how to do it, but she was full of determination. She understood that it would not be easy, but she believed in herself and in her love. She knew that if she was strong and patient, she could overcome all difficulties. She believed that one day Margaret would see in her not a peasant, but a worthy woman deserving of her son's love. For Margaret's anniversary, guests came from all over the region. The house shone with showy luxury. Crystal chandeliers reflected the light of hundreds of candles. Tables overflowed with delicacies, and waiters in pristine white gloves circulated among the guests, offering champagne and canapés. For Claire, used to the modest coziness of her parents' apartment, all of this felt like a backdrop to an unattainable life. She felt awkward in her new dress, which seemed to scream about her provinciality against the backdrop of the designer outfits of the other ladies. Daniel was, as always, nearby, but his presence did not bring her comfort. He seemed afraid to glance her way, as if he feared that his mother would notice his fleeting tenderness and unleash her anger on him. Claire understood his fear, but it did not make her feel any better. She longed for support, at least for a single encouraging word, but Daniel remained silent, hiding behind a mask of polite aloofness. The arrival of Claire's parents felt like a breath of fresh air to her. They came quietly, without fanfare, but their faces were lit with love and pride for their daughter. Her father, Thomas, a strong man with kind eyes, carried a carefully wrapped package. Her mother, Helen, embraced Claire tenderly, whispering in her ear, "Don't worry, sweetie, we're with you." These simple words warmed Claire's heart and gave her strength. Claire's parents looked around shyly, trying not to attract attention. Margaret cast a fleeting, dismissive glance at them and turned away, as if they were invisible. Claire felt a surge of anger bubbling inside her, but she held herself back, not wanting to create a scene. The moment of gift-giving arrived. Guests presented Margaret with expensive jewelry, antique vases, and trips to prestigious resorts. Margaret accepted them with a haughty smile, assessing the value of each gift. When it was Claire's turn, she stepped forward nervously. "This is from us and my parents, Margaret," Claire quietly said, extending the package. Thomas carefully unwrapped it, revealing a carved wooden box. The box had been handmade by Claire's father. He had spent several months painstakingly carving each pattern. The box's lid depicted a landscape with fields, birches, and a quiet river. The box was imbued with the smell of wood and the warmth of the craftsman's hands. This was not just a gift. It was a piece of the soul, a symbol of love and respect. Margaret glanced disdainfully at the box. Her face twisted with contempt. "What is this?" she asked coldly. Claire was taken aback. "It's a box, Margaret. My father made it. He worked very hard on it." "Worked hard," Margaret mocked. "And what should I do with it? Keep my expensive jewelry in it? I have real works of art for that." She ostentatiously shoved the box aside, as if it were garbage. Claire felt her cheeks burn. She tried to say something, but the words caught in her throat. Her parents stood beside her with their heads bowed, humiliated and offended. "This is a family heirloom," Thomas said quietly, trying to preserve dignity. "We wanted it to become part of your family." "A family heirloom?" Margaret laughed. "Our family has its own heirlooms. Real ones, not these country knickknacks." She scanned the room, enjoying the effect she was having. Silence fell in the hall. Guests were stunned, unsure how to respond to this scene. Daniel stood like paralyzed, unable to utter a word. Claire felt as if the world around her was collapsing. Suddenly the silence was broken by a firm voice. "I am sorry, Margaret, but I cannot remain silent." All eyes turned to Richard, Daniel's boss. He rose from his seat and looked at Margaret with disdain. "I believe your behavior is unacceptable," he continued. "You have insulted not only Claire and her parents, but all the ordinary people who work hard and create such beautiful things with their own hands. I will not tolerate such treatment in my surroundings." Margaret paled with rage. "Who are you to dictate to me how to behave in my own house?" she hissed. "I am one who values justice and decency," Richard replied. "And I will not allow you to humiliate people simply because they do not meet your ideas of wealth and status. Daniel, I hope you understand what I mean." He cast a glance at Daniel, who stood with his head down. Richard turned to Claire and her parents. "I apologize for Margaret's behavior," he said. "I hope you will not judge us all by her actions. Your box is a wonderful gift, and I am sure it will bring happiness to your family. And you, Margaret, do you know? I have the same kind of collective farm family. I am proud of it. Daniel, I expect you in my office tomorrow. We will talk about your future." He then decisively headed for the exit, leaving Margaret in a state of rage and humiliation. Guests moved aside silently, afraid to break the silence. Claire watched him go, feeling gratitude and hope. For the first time in a long while, she felt she was not alone in her struggle. The next morning, a thick, almost palpable silence hung over the house. The silence was dramatically different from the loud merriment and showy splendor of yesterday's anniversary. Claire woke up with a heavy heart, anticipating the inevitable storm. She knew that Richard's words would have consequences. Daniel was gloomy and taciturn at breakfast. He nervously fiddled with the edge of the tablecloth, avoiding Claire's gaze. Margaret did not come down for breakfast, which was unusual. Usually, she, like a strict overseer, controlled every morning, giving instructions to the servants and making snide remarks about the appearance and behavior of those in her household. Around 10 a.m., Daniel was summoned to the office. Claire walked him to the door, feeling a rising anxiety. He didn't hug her goodbye, just nodded briefly and hurried to the car. The day dragged painfully long. Claire tried to occupy herself with household chores, but everything fell through her fingers. She kept going to the window, looking out for passing cars, hoping to see Daniel returning. By evening, he came back. His face was pale and haggard. He silently walked into the office, not saying a word to Claire. She followed him and timidly knocked on the door. "Daniel, what happened?" she quietly asked, entering the room. He sat at his desk, staring into space. Sighing, he raised his eyes to hers. His eyes revealed exhaustion and disappointment. "I was called in by Richard," he said in a dull tone. It was an unpleasant conversation. Very unpleasant. Claire sat on the edge of the sofa, trying to remain calm. "What did he say?" "He reprimanded me, said my behavior yesterday was unacceptable, that I did not defend my wife, and allowed my mother to humiliate her family." Claire lowered her eyes. It hurt to hear this, but she wasn't surprised. She knew Daniel was weak and indecisive, especially when it came to his mother. He said it would affect my career, Daniel continued. I've been demoted. Temporarily, of course, but it's all because of you, Claire. The last words sounded like an accusation. Claire flinched. Because of me, Daniel? I didn't ask you for anything. I just wanted your mother to accept me. You should have known that was impossible, Daniel exploded. She will never accept you. You saw how she is. Why did you bring this stupid box? Why did you have to present us all in such a light? Claire felt a lump rise in her throat. She struggled to hold back tears. It was a gift from my parents, Daniel. They made it with all their hearts. I thought it might soften her heart. You always complicate everything, Claire, Daniel grumbled, turning away from her. Always. Claire stood up from the sofa. She could no longer stay in that room, breathing that air saturated with resentment and disappointment. She left the office, closing the door behind her. Later, at dinner, Margaret was silent. She merely threw contemptuous glances at Claire. Daniel also didn't utter a word. The atmosphere at the table was so tense that it was knife edge. In the following days, life in the house changed. Margaret was no longer invited to meetings and events involving Daniel's superiors. Her influence in the family weakened. She became more withdrawn and irritable. Claire felt the chasm grow between her and Daniel. He increasingly stayed late at work, avoided conversations, and slept in the guest room. She realized that their marriage was on the brink. One morning, Claire found a letter in the mailbox. The envelope bore a familiar handwriting. It was a letter from Richard. Claire's heart raced. She tore open the envelope with trembling hands and began to read. In the letter, Richard expressed his support for Claire and her family. He wrote that he was deeply touched by their kindness and sincerity. He also mentioned that he knew about Claire's father's talent for woodworking and would like to offer him a collaboration on a new project. Claire read the letter several times, unable to believe her eyes. Tears of joy filled her eyes. She felt hope welling up inside her soul. On the same day, Claire's father received a call. He was offered a job in a large company specializing in furniture and interior design. His talent was recognized. Claire called her father to congratulate him. She could hear his joy and excitement in his voice. He was happy that his work was finally in demand. Claire realized that justice exists. Perhaps not always immediately, but it will prevail. Kindness and talent will always find their way. She looked in the mirror. Her eyes no longer held the sadness and despair that had haunted her in recent months. She felt strength and confidence within herself. She knew that her worth was not in status and wealth, but in dignity and humanity. Claire's story did not end with a fairy tale ending. Her relationship with Daniel remained strained, and Margaret continued to treat her with disdain. But Claire no longer felt like a victim. She knew she had the support of her family, her father's talent, and faith in justice. She understood that dignity doesn't come from someone else's approval, but from how you choose to carry yourself when no one claps. Claire had finally stopped waiting for Margaret's approval. She no longer looked to Daniel for rescue. Instead, she looked within. She realized it is important to remain true to oneself, regardless of the circumstances. It is important to value loved ones and not allow anyone to humiliate oneself. It is important to fight for justice, even if it seems impossible. Claire decided she would live her life, help her father with his new project, and seek her own happiness. She would no longer allow anyone to determine her fate. Not Margaret. Not Daniel. Not the weight of expectations placed on her shoulders the day she stepped into that house. She had carried too much for too long. She would forge her own happiness, step by step, day by day. And she believed she could do it. After all, she had the most important thing, faith in herself and faith in good. She knew storms would still come, but now she had roots. She had clarity, and that was enough to overcome any difficulties. Claire stood at the threshold of a new chapter, not defined by shame or silence, but by strength, purpose, and quiet resilience. And that, perhaps, was the real happy ending.